Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Mitch. I'm also known as Planetary from the Planetary Ashes, and welcome to the very first podcast of the Game Dev Couch, where this podcast is all about talking to other game developers and indie game developers, the whole genre of game developers, to actually understand their story, where they started, and also how they are going up to this day. I have been working on game dev for a good 4 years. I've been working on Godot, been trying to go through different game engines myself, and I've decided to stick with Godot and have plenty of fun learning about it, and it was actually quite joyful. But with me tonight we have BizMaster Studio. How are you going, BizMaster Studio? How is your wonderful week?
It has been a pretty hefty week, but I'm doing alright, alive and healthy, so that's, all they can really ask for, so that's good.
That's wonderful. I have actually been watching your stream lately, and it has been quite an joyful feeling to actually see you take your time and effort into making the game that you actually want to make. Would you mind telling the audience how long have you been doing game development, and what game program you're using right now?
So I started game development quite some time ago, but it's one of those things where finding the time to do it outside a full-time job and everything's quite difficult. But I originally just always been enamored by games and computers and that kind of thing. And so even from a very young age, I had an uncle that was teaching me a little bit about games and how they're made and whatnot. And so once I was old enough to afford my own equipment, I started to try and find things that I could build with.
I think we all have our point of turn when we actually want to build something. But the only thing that comes to our way is money issue. I think that's the only problem that comes to us. It's just where we can get the money to actually start building something that we want. And yeah, I can actually understand that.
For sure, yeah. And so I figured I've always loved JRPGs. Mm-hmm. The likes of Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest and those kinds of games.
Yes.
And I wanted to create something similar to that, in that old school vein, and so RPG Maker was just a clear choice, I think, in terms of being someone who didn't understand how to code yet. I knew a little bit, but that was about it. The basics.
Yeah.
Hello world.
The basics.
Yeah. And so I've started my own project. I wanted to make it unique, so my choice was just to draw all of my own assets, and pixel art I figured was the best way to go about that. So I've been working on learning pixel art probably about 10 years or so now, off and on, and worked on that game probably for about 3 years, but again, on and off.
Fair enough. So what game are you currently working on at the moment right now?
So something I wouldn't recommend is working on more than one project at once.
Yeah.
So my project in RPG Maker at the moment is Apprentice of Artrea. And outside of that, I'm working with a team on a project called Exploring Story. So that was a whole different ball game. We did a Ludum Dare 48, and it came first in innovation category, and so we decided to go and to make a full, bigger version of it, and that's just been dragged out over time. So there was a big year gap in our Apprentice of Artrea's development, and that's where I was working on mostly Exploring Story stuff with the team. So it's been good getting back to Apprentice of Artrea in the last few months, and looking forward to the future of that game.
Well, and I can actually tell by looking at your stream, you actually are so in depth with it, in love with the game that you actually want to make, and seeing how much time and effort you have put into it. It's actually quite interesting seeing how it is like a monochrome. Is it actually going to be monochrome?
Yeah, pretty much. It's the Game Boy sepia tones, so it's almost like a yellow-brown palette. There's 3 sets of colours. There's the green that everyone recognises. There's another 4 colours, which is more of a white and a dark green palette, and then there's the sepia tones, and I chose sepia. I hate high contrast. I've never enjoyed a high contrast, and so I figured sepia tones is the best way to go about it.
Yeah, I'll say this. I had my fair share with... I had my fair share of making small monochrome games, but... some of them were a little bit easy, some of them were a little bit difficult in my previous game jams, but yeah, I think with the more color you have to actually learn, the more difficult it becomes. And I think with me and pixel art, it's more like a huge learning curve for a bit when it comes to learning all different colors to actually make a specific character, where sepia, green, and white, green palette and the white palette, it seems a little bit easier to actually, where less is actually more detailed.
Yeah, it's strange. It's kind of freeing only having 4 colours to work with, because you're not having to worry about finding colours that fit each other all the time. It's just there, the 4 colours. The problem comes when you've got those 4 colours and you're like, one more colour would be really handy right about now. How do I make this work with 4 colours, damn it? Sit there racking your brain. But it's been a good experience. I've always enjoyed limited palettes or limited canvases, and so working at this scale with the 4 colours has been a good experience so far.
With me, I'm actually a polar opposite, which I actually like having more colours, though it's a little bit time consuming to actually look over the colours and trying to figure out what colour will be best suited for a specific character. Yeah, I think I need to actually look back at the monochrome monochrome palette and just have a whack at it and just see what I can come up with. But yeah, that is actually pretty interesting that you had inspiration based on just Game Boy, like actual Game Boy. Like, have you actually did you actually play Game Boys that actually inspired you to make those kind of games?
That's kind of an interesting story. I was eldest of 8 children, and we were not well off for most of our lives. So we'd never had a Game Boy. Our first console was this very outdated Atari that literally was given to us. But, I saw these other kids walking around with Game Boys and Game Boy Colors when they first came out, and I was blown away by them. They were just freaking awesome. I had a PSP at one stage by the time I was a little bit older and working. But they never lasted very long.
No, the PSP never lasts long. With a short battery life and so easily broken, it never lasts long. So I understand.
Yeah. So I've over time gone back to looking at a lot of those games that I watched people play and fell in love with and fond with, and ended up playing them after the fact. Some of the old Dragon Quest games. There was actually a couple that came out on 3DS, which were pretty awesome. So I ended up playing something similar, But yeah, a lot of them now are remastered and coloured and the rest of it. But,
yeah, fair. As for me, I wasn't actually brought into the pixel art of gaming. I was actually brought into the low poly modeling of PS1 and I think it was Nintendo 64 era when it started coming around. But I think, and I actually adore it. I wanted to give it a shot, but by the time I started doing 3D, like actual low poly modeling, it's just like, yeah, it feels easy, but when you get into the animation of things, it's like, what am I supposed to do? Like, I'm supposed to make the person walk, but I end up making him collapsing right to the floor. It's like, that's not how you're supposed to animate a character. But I think by the time emulation was a thing, and I know it's illegal to actually emulate games, but hey, I just do it for the fun of it. I've actually started to love the actual pixel art that most of the arcade games have actually brought out, like with the Simpsons arcade, the Metal Slug series, and also most of the side-scroller shooters or beat-em-ups. The actual texture of the color and how they brought the character to life actually makes me want to have a go at it, but I just didn't know where to start. And then comes the classical first-person shooter era, like the good old classical Doom, Wolfenstein, and everything. Yeah. By the time I actually started that, I just looked at it thinking, oh my god, this is actually going to be easy. But when I got halfway through to it, it's like, no, this is actually way more harder than I expected. So so I had to actually drop that whole project and actually rework it to mitigate me having a massive headache, going back to the project and thinking, all right, I need to do this, I need to do that. Okay, this ain't working. All right, go back, and it's like, it's just a no. So,
yeah, it's one of those things like emulating things that you've seen. You look at it and you're like, there can't be too much to it. You know, they can't be that hard. And then you gotta try to recreate it. It's like, how does this work? What do I do?
Yeah, and that's the feeling of it. I actually love it. I also love first-person shooters, but I decided to go back to the actual format of 2D scroller and shooter, 2D scrollers, platforming and shooters. Like, I always dig in the game. I actually play for fun, but I actually dig in and see what this game is all about and trying to figure out how does it work, which I'm currently doing right now for one of my projects at the moment. But yeah, it's quite interesting. So when you actually started to play RPG games, like, what actually triggered you to actually dig in deeper to understand how those games work? How did that come across?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, at first it was just playing games. I mean, loving JRPGs. The thing about those is, you know, back in the day, they came with guidebooks, you know, thicker than your thumb.
Yeah.
And, you know, I've still got somewhere a guidebook for Final Fantasy 12, and it's massive. There's so many things, so many secrets, so many little bits of game design and stuff that you just never would have thought of. And it wasn't until later on when I thought maybe making games could be a thing. Like, maybe this is something that not just companies can do. That all of that studying of these games and finding out how they work and what goes where and where, you know, the secrets and all, you know, what's more intriguing, what's more fun, why does this world feel empty? All those kind of things just all come together and make a lot more sense.
Yeah, that's fair. I think I can actually share my story when it comes to when it comes down to any platformer. Like, a very good example will be Super Mario for me. Well, Super Mario World, actually, because that's when I've actually started to be interested of the genre. It was actually more of how how did the character move, and when the character actually picks up certain items, I start to think, how does that work? It's like, and I started to dig in deeper and deeper and deeper and looked into it. It was like, oh, so it's because of this particular mechanic. That's how this particular item work with the feather cape, where whenever Mario actually starts dashing, he actually flies up to the air. And without the feather cape, he still managed to do a massive long jump, but he just drops like a ton of rock afterwards because he doesn't have a feather cape on him.
Yeah, I had a similar kind of epiphany, I think, when I was playing things like Final Fantasy, and you're going into areas like there's the plains, and you just grind there forever, and you start to think, like, how how did they figure out like all of the stats you need to make this balanced? Like, how much health would, how do you do that mathematics? Like, what health? How do you scale it up? How do you make this not over in 10 minutes, but also not take 20 hours to just grind one area, And that started to tick over in my brain.
Which speaking of that, another epiphany that actually came in, and though I haven't actually played the game series for a while, like at all, I start to wonder how Pokemon actually does that, because it's in part and parcel with Final Fantasy, and like you roam around, you end up finding a Pokemon, and you start doing that. And I think back in the earlier days of Pokemon, like both the Japan and the actual PAL and US version of it, they didn't have a leveling like they didn't have a bar to show how much the Pokemon needs to get to level up. And I start to wonder, is there a way of telling the player that they have actually leveled up the Pokemon with ease, or do they still have another match to go to actually grind and level up, as you were saying, for Final Fantasy?
Yeah.
But
yeah, I mean, looking at Pokemon though, I think the best thing you could learn from Pokemon is how to sell two of the same game and everyone be happy with it. That would be pretty good.
Yeah, just to trade Pokemons towards yourselves. Like, I need this, I need that. All right, well, I got two of the Game Boys of Pokemon. I can actually do it myself. There we go. Got the Pokemon there, and that's it. Just that simple.
Yeah,
but I think looking at the newer generations of the games that we're looking at, like the genres, what particular game in your genre are you looking forward in the modern genre?
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting. We've been kind of lucky in the last couple of years to have a few titles come out in the old school JRPG kind of style. Like one very recently, Chained Echoes, is bloody awesome. You're starting to see these old school games implement new ideas without them being, big 3D 200-hour games. Like you're still seeing these old school RPGs, but with new innovative ideas, and obviously with no problems with whatever amount of colours and pixel art you want to do as well. So it's a pretty exciting time, especially when you see mixed media things like Octopath Traveler still having so much depth in their story, but still adding all these different light effects and that without making it look, too different, too distant.
Yeah.
It's kind of exciting.
Which I'll be honest, I had looked at the game and I actually want to give that game a go. It's just the fact that I'm actually flat broke. I can't actually get the game at the moment. It's like,
Yeah, I know the feeling. I've gotten to the point now where Game Pass is all of my games. Like, that's, I used to buy games here and there, and now it's like, yeah, $90. No, I can't. No.
Yeah,
that's this week's food. What are you talking about?
Yeah, that's the part and parcel of Game Pass, and I think it's a shame that PS4 doesn't do that. Which I gotta say, Xbox is a bit ahead of a curve at the moment with the Game Pass. So I might need to have a look at that somewhere along the line. But I think looking at my genre with the platformer or shooters, I've actually seen a lot of like inspired games based on Metal Slug or Super Mario at this point, and it actually looks pretty neat and looks nice. It looks awesome to see the amount of time and effort that these game developers have actually put in to make these games awesome. Even alone, there are some remastered port version, like with Mega Man Legacy Collections. It's still good to know that some, like even the AAA companies like Capcom, still want to please the retro gamers as much, but without having to having that kind of old school, like 3 to 4, like 2 to 4 hours non-stop. That's it. Simple, easy, not hair pulling. It's just that easy, to be honest.
Yeah, it's great actually that game development has become so accessible. Like, you can literally pick up a free engine with knowing very little code and make a project from scratch. It's incredible. And the good thing about that is that you find a lot of big companies, as much as they might make a great Metal Slug game or Castlevania game or Metroidvania game, innovation's not what they're looking for. Yeah, they're looking for what sells. And then you get these little devs with 3 or 4 people that spend a couple years on a game, and it has really cool mechanics in it. It's like, this is something new. This is what I like to see. Like, a remaster's great, but I've already played that. Like, it's nice to see new ideas coming into the genres and making things interesting.
Yeah. But speaking of engines, I have heard news lately in the game development scene that some particular game engines are getting a little bit out there or becoming a little bit bloated, as I've heard from Lost Relic Games, saying that I think probably Unity is having a little bit of trouble by its of its own self, I think, but I could be wrong at some point. I really don't know.
I have heard the same thing, and I think that's why a lot of people that are making smaller projects have started working with engines like Godot, where you can do similar 2D stuff fairly simple without all of the fluff that's slowing the engine down and wrecking optimization.
Yeah, that.
But having not known bugger all code, I can't confirm it.
Trust me, I'm actually on the exact same boat. I know little to no coding, but I'm actually working my way to actually learn Python, which, mind you, is slightly easy, but can be somewhat difficult to master somewhere along the line. It's just it's a painful process, to be honest. And I think, other than Godot, I think most people decide to look at Game Maker Studio and, heaven forbid, Unreal Engine 5. Yikes.
Yeah, I've noticed Game Maker Studio was doing really well. I think it dropped off a little bit when they started to decide to do subscription-based stuff. But there's still such a big community behind Game Maker. It's a fantastic engine. It's well optimized. And again, it's something that you can pick up without knowing much code and build something from scratch. But I feel like something I've learned, even with my limited knowledge, is that, like, I've done things with RPG Maker just by tweaking a thing here and there or understanding how it's working means you can do so much more with it. So I would recommend anyone who's picking up an engine, even with no code in it, just being able to make something from scratch, to learn basic code, just to understand what the engine's doing, because they're going to be able to do so much more with it that way, I think.
Yeah. And I came to realize that there is a lot of tutorials there, and I think what you said is true. It's best to just start from scratch and build yourself up. But I think in Godot, and I think most of the community, I'm not going to start a controversy here, but I think most of the community on Godot actually tries to make a full game without actually starting from the scratch by looking at tutorials. And I'll be honest, I'm actually one of them. I think I may need to rehash that out and actually probably do it from the ground up and actually learn from my mistakes, where the actual term practice makes perfect.
For sure. Yeah. It's funny when you look back on your work and like, what the hell was I thinking?
Yes.
You thought that was good. Oh god.
Yeah, but I'll be honest with you as well. There's also tutorials that are actually based on outdated engines as well. Say for instance, if people want to learn Unity, they will be learning of the older version of Unity. Or for people who like to learn from Godot, there's they're focusing on the old version of Godot, but still somewhat manageable to actually continue on to Godot 4 at the moment, which that is pretty crazy. But with Unreal Engine, I think they only have focused on Unreal Engine 4, not Unreal Engine 5 yet, which might be a little bit scary for people who actually want to get into making game development and not know what game engine they want to choose.
Yeah, it's... I mean, I was saying earlier, it's amazing how much choice we've got with whatever skill set you have, but that does seem to be the problem now, and I've seen it so often when people come in and it's like, oh, what's this engine?
Yeah.
I'm trying to make this. Is it good for that? I mean, there's so many different pros and cons with such an amazing choice of so many different things. You kind of have to know what you're building.
Yeah.
And then find out what engines are good for what. It's insane. It's difficult.
It is insane, and it is difficult. And it goes part and parcel with figuring out what art program you have to use, what music program you want to use, or if you decided to go into 3D modeling, you need to figure out what what modeling program will be best for you as well. And that's when everything starts to crumble down and start to weigh in on your brain to figure out what you need to do at some point.
Yeah, for sure. And you get like, oh, this is what the pros use, but this is what I can afford. Will it work in the same engine? How do you export this so it works with other people's exports? And, oh god,
yeah.
It gets messy.
I think if anything, if any game developers, either indie or solo developers, want to actually get in, it's best to start off with a free software at first to actually understand. And if you actually want to get into it and learn, you can actually look at some particular tutorials, not all of it, but some, so you can get an idea of how this works, how that works, how to make a specific model, how to make a certain beat of a music, or how to make a single pixel art or a pixel art character with ease without having to stress and without having to use a lot of money on Udemy, which, don't get me wrong, Udemy is good. It's just you have to pay a little bit.
Sorry, make a character without stress. When you find that, let me know where it is. Making sprites, animated sprites, it's a skill that takes a lot of practice. It's one thing to make a wonderful looking sprite, and it's another thing to go, alright, now how do I make its legs move?
Oh god, the legs, sprite legs. I had so much trouble with him. How
about we find something that doesn't have legs? I thought that through and through. I'm like, alright, we're making a floating robot for this game. That's the only choice I have right now.
Yeah, see, you're lucky. I'm not. My character has to physically walk throughout the whole terrain and needs to have that walking animation and jumping animation. Oh god, that is so difficult. And mind you, it took me a pretty good 3 hours to actually work on him, and I'll be honest, it did look alright, but it just looks a little bit sloppy on my end. But just looking back at it for the second time, it's like, oh god.
Yeah, you go back and touch things all the time. It's actually something that you got to be so aware of, because you could just spend the rest of your life going back and fixing things to match your current skill level.
Yeah, that is true. The only worst critic, as most people say, the only worst critic is yourself, and that's all you can do.
For sure. Yeah, I remember being able to create a 4-directional sprite for RPG Maker for the first time. That was a massive hurdle for me. That was a big, finally, I can do it.
I think I remember the first time that I've actually did a character was a 8x8 character, and it was actually a Mario, and a rip-off version of Mario, and it was actually for a game jam. called the I think it was called the Try Jam. I think it was, where you have.
Oh, I've heard of that, yeah.
Where you have to actually do it in 3 hours throughout the weekend, cumulative. So in total, like, you can do 1.5 hours one day and do the other half, 1 hour and a half the other day. Or you can do 3 hours on one single day. And I think I've actually done it on Game Maker Studio and actually look up the tutorials of how to make the character move, how to make a level, stick out on with ease, and not making sure the character falls through. Is like, yeah, okay, well, it's a little bit difficult, but afterwards I've actually submitted it in and came 86 or 68 out of 100, I think it was. So,
well, that's good. It's not last.
Not dead last. But yeah, I think another game jam that I've took part and parcel was the Kenny's Jam. Yes. Now, remember that conversation that we had on Twitch when you said you actually wanted to do a side scroller shoot 'em up like the 1942s and the 1942 series that you mentioned?
Yeah.
That's
sure.
what I was working on last time. But the setback was I had to actually do it with a certain theme, which was growth. It was like, so how do I make a plane grow then? Like I have 3 separate planes, all with the same colors, and I have a power-up system. And I was like, why not if we make a power-up system where if the plane grabs it, the plane will actually grow in size, not by like actual size, like by pixel, but actual size by changing the plane. And once they actually got hit by the bullet, they actually descale back to its original form. Kind of like how Mario does with picking up the mushroom, then picking up the fire flower. If he gets hit, he goes back down to his previous state and then his smaller state.
Yeah. I think old vertical shooters used to do something similar with shooting power-ups, where if you get hit, you went back to a smaller version of that bullet.
Yeah.
Before the power-ups.
Yeah. Several of those games have actually done it. Raiden is one of them, and 1944, the Loop Masters was also another one that does it as well. So, yeah. Oh man, but yeah, it's actually quite interesting how many people actually participate in game jams. And you actually mentioned one of them earlier in the podcast, the Ludamari. Is that correct?
Yeah, Ludamari. Yeah, it's a good one. I mean, it's a 3-day event. Is it 3? Yeah, I think it's a 3-day event. Happens twice a year. And the amount of people that join it, it's probably one of the biggest in the world. I mean, you can have like 3,000-4,000 people joining Ludamari, which is massive. I've always found that was my first game jam, and I didn't realize just how good they are in terms of like learning game development, because you're thinking about the best way to do something. It's a bit like when someone says to you the best way to learn to draw something is to draw it in like 10 minutes and then 5 minutes and then 2.5 minutes, because like you're figuring out the best, quickest way to draw something. I feel like game jams do that for game development in such a big way, because I learnt a hell of a lot in that project. And I've done a couple of game jams since, and they were certainly squeezed for time, but that's life. But you still learn so much in such a short amount of time. Yeah. Which
some of the game jams, other than the Try Jam I've participated in, there's also other game jams that actually wanted to test you out, like test you within a month or within a week, to see if you are quite capable to actually deal with the constraints of having that kind of time limit on you to try to make a prototype, or to see if you can actually get a minimal viable product at the ready before the game jam ends, which some of the particular game jams I've actually participated in which was the Metroidvania month, which goes for a month and happens once every month, I think, or once every 2 months, I think it was. But also there was also last year at the beginning of December was the 7 days first-person shooter, where I've quickly learned that I could not make a first-person shooter within 7 days. Even with a team, it was actually pretty difficult because none of us knew how to do well with first-person shooters, and didn't have the knowledge of how to make it a little bit more better.
Yeah, there's so many like little tips that like turn a game on its head. Like just like even with movement of a character in like a Metroidvania or something, you could use the movement you find in a lot of engines, but learning how to create really good feeling movement as well as responsive movement is a skill, and it's something that can make an okay game into a great game without even having good art. It's something that is something you need to learn through practice and experience.
Yeah, that is very true. A very good example of having no detailed arts and still manage to function pretty well is Retro City Rampage DX Plus, which actually was pretty interesting when I've actually first got it. It was so small in pixel details, but you can still tell who the character is, and how they move is also marvelous as well.
Nice.
But I think if any other games that has actually done it pretty well, I think I might need to actually dig out my library and figure it out myself, because I think having too many games, I actually lost track in time.
Yeah, I've heard one of the games that has done exceedingly well in terms of feeling great in platformer games is Celeste. People keep talking the world about it, and I have this terrible curse of finding platformer games like super enticing, like I love them, and I'm also probably the worst at them. So I tend to like want to play them and never play them.
Yeah, I actually know that feeling all too well. I have heard of Celeste, and I haven't actually got it yet, but I have heard such great things about that particular game. I think it was in very positive reviews, and I think probably at mostly positive at this point. So I might need to grab that game. But another game that actually did pretty well was also Super Meat Boy. As much as I love that game, it's rage inducing. It has fluent movement, it has fluent jumps, like air movement, everything. It actually does pretty well.
Yep.
But the fact that you have to like think on the spot and try to avoid obstacles within certain split seconds, it's just it's just not good for me, thank you.
Yeah, I think platformers with like the difference between a good one and a great one is the difference between dying and knowing that it was your fault, or dying and wondering whether it was your fault or whether the game just doesn't have a good edge on that corner or something.
Yeah.
You know, like
Yeah, which can be said to almost all the other genre as well. There's some games that I have actually came across that makes me wonder, is that actually my fault, or was it actually the game's fault at some point? Because there is some point when games actually do have their technical glitches, and you tend to see it right at the last second, but you realize you press something, it's far too late, and you just know that you pretty much signed your own death warrant.
Yeah, a lot of old school platform games used to have a jump, and it was like really weird because it would be like a weird timing on the jump, and so you'd press it, but it would be too late to not jump, and so you're dead. Oh god, any games like that, I cannot play them. I just simply cannot play
I think no one can actually play it. Like, it will take so much time and effort, and also yet a lot of brain cells to actually try and survive through platformers, without a doubt.
And my 3 ain't gonna do that.
Yeah, I think in part and parcel with me with RPGs as well, there's some moments where I have my technical blunders, because it's either because I didn't know how to play RPG games like properly, because I have not touched any of the old Final Fantasy games, so pretty much Final Fantasy 1 to 6, but did touch upon Final Fantasy 7 and 8, but afterwards I skipped 10 to 14, tried 15 and the remake version of 7, which ended up being more of a hack and slash game at this point, which I gotta say it might be good for modern console, but you can't deny the fact that the old Final Fantasy actually got them there in the first place.
Yeah, for sure. I used to love the old school turn-based stuff. It's been interesting the path they've taken to try and make it more dynamic. 12 was a very interesting idea where it was kind of like, it was turn-based, but it was also like you could do whatever and walk around and avoid some enemies and stuff. And they've tried to... I think Final Fantasy VII was one of the best iterations of that I've seen so far, where you kind of do have some turn-based, like one will take 2 bars, one move will take 4 bars, so it still feels a little bit turn-based, but it's just an action game at the end of the day.
Yeah, that is true. But also looking at the most recent, like the modern RPGs, aside from Final Fantasy, oh god, I can't believe I'm bringing this series up. But the South Park games actually did pretty well with the turn RPGs, and they actually tried 2 different formats of RPG. They actually did a turn-based RPG, which was South Park: The Stick of Truth. And then there was the tactical RPG, taking inspiration of Fire Emblem for Fractured But Whole.
Yeah, I haven't played them, but it's very interesting that they were able to do 2 different RPG genres, and from what I've heard, they did them pretty well.
Yeah, they actually did do it pretty well. And it didn't have any technical blunders, because every time when you actually take your turn or make your move, it's pretty much every action is you're doing, and if you stuffed up on an action, it's pretty much your fault for actually putting your character out there, other than saying that you made a mistake. No, this is your fault. You actually have to cop the consequences for it.
For sure. I thought there was a very brave move in the Yakuza series, because they used to be a more action-based game, and they went turn-based.
Yes, that is true. That is also true.
And it was really good. It was so good. It's the only reason I tried it out.
Yes. See, I looked at Yakuza 7. I actually adore the Yakuza series, and I almost have the whole collection of it, actually, and almost triple dipped in buying the whole series. But yeah, looking at how Sega took a slight right angle turn to actually try something new with Yakuza 7 because of Ichiban, because Ichiban is the main hero. He actually likes Dragon Quest, and what is Dragon Quest? Dragon Quest is a turn-based RPG, so
my favorite JRPGs series.
So they built the game around Ichiban, on how he view himself as the hero, with his friends as comrades in arms, like brothers or sisters, but also as enemies, as so many silly things, which actually makes me giggle a lot at some point when I look at those enemies. But
yeah, They're definitely great ideas. So you could see that people had some fun coming up with that stuff.
Yeah, they definitely did. But in Yakuza 7, they actually have that system where they barred off the player to actually go any further, telling you to actually go back and actually grind, which is a good thing. It's a marvelous thing to tell the players to slow down, take it easy, go back, go grind up, go level up, until you hit this recommended level. Then you can come back and go again, which was a very great recommendation for people who hasn't actually played JRPG or any RPG at all, to have that kind of have that kind of roadblock there.
Yeah, I mean, that's very JRPG-like as well. That's what you would expect at some point to go, alright, yeah, I got my ass whooped here. I kind of need to go back, find some new gear or get some levels.
Yeah, which sadly for me, I didn't know that on my first time with playing Yakuza 7. I end up getting whooped right at the right next to the end of the game, because of one particular boss who is a level 50, and he has his brother with him who is also a level 50. So technically stacking up, they're level 100, and I was just a simple level 40. And by the time you actually look at the scale difference, like the power difference between the two, you just think, right, I might need to go back and start over again because I need to go grind.
Yeah. I think the thing that JRPGs do well, if you do need to grind, is offering like these different side quests. Some do it better than others, because I've never been a fan of just killing the same thing over and over again. But if there's some kind of initiative to it, Dragon Quest XII had this chain system where if you killed a bunch of the same kind of enemy, you could chain them together and they would drop better and better things. I thought that was just such a cool idea. Or, you know, and sometimes side quests can be better than the main quests. It's so often the case. And so, yeah, I've never been a huge fan of just grinding things out. I suppose that's why I can't play other games that are grindy.
Which I actually do like. Which I have to agree. Side quests is actually more fun when it comes, other than just trying to go to the main quest. It actually gives gamers or players some flavor of what the game is all about, and not just be linear, just be open path.
For sure. And sometimes it can be different as well and break up the gameplay a bit. You know, I mean, like the mini games you see in a lot of games, like Final Fantasy X with its Blitzball, which some people hate, but I spent more time playing that than the game at one stage. You know, it just breaks it up and gives you something different to do in between these long slugs of you know, certain areas that might be a bit grindier than others.
Yeah. And also looking at side missions, or for in a platformer perspective, like a good example will be Super Mario World, where it's not all about trying to stick to a linear path. Like, you got a whole span of levels that you need to go through. Like, there is secret pathways that you can actually get there and actually look for ways to get to the castle like very quickly in a short way. But also you have to find the switches to help you progress with items, or to get you to the star road and the special road, which was an absolute pain to deal with, to be honest. But other than that, it actually feels a little bit linear, but also a little bit open when it comes to some platform games that actually forces you to go out there and explore a little bit more, because you might be missing something that could help you go further.
For sure. I think that's something that those games and JRPGs share. Is like, there's nothing worse than going down this hidden path to find nothing. You know, or in the platformer sense, it's like going back 3 rooms and finding a secret door and finding something very small. A good game will find a way to make people want to explore all the nooks and crannies, and they'll reward you for doing that. Some games just seem to do that better than others, for sure.
Yeah, I think a good example, which is part of the RPG genre, but also with the first-person genre, is Borderlands. Borderlands actually has a very good example of forcing the player to look around, do some side missions, and explore plethora of areas to actually get an idea where you need to go. But also yet, it builds on the story of understanding each characters and how they got involved with being a vault hunter in their own sense.
Yeah, for sure. And I think Borderlands did something better than some games, which is they didn't force people to go looking for things, but there are just little secret doors and secret things and collectibles and stuff that you can look for people who are definitely of that nature, because not everyone is.
that is true. That is true. Some people will actually focus on the main story and not actually look around and explore much, which I blame myself for that one. But it also hinders the process of actually trying to pass on to the main story without even noticing that you're going up against enemies that are 10 times higher than you and can deal a lot of damage towards you if you're not well equipped or well experienced enough to actually hash out.
Yeah, for sure.
Alrighty. Well, we're actually coming close to the 9-minute mark of the podcast because I was expecting to do a short one, but bloody hell, we actually gone for a good hour or so. So this is
having too much fun.
So in this end segment here, we're actually going to leave off of a little bit of advice when it comes to newcomers who actually want to learn how to become a game developer as well, like how to become a game developer or where they want to start and so on and so forth. So BizMaster, nearly lost my English there. What kind of advice would you actually give out to the newcomers if they want to start following in your footsteps, trying JRPGs or anything else?
I think no matter what you want to go out and build, make it small and know what you're trying to build, because it's one thing to want to be able to build Final Fantasy X in your first game, and I see so many developers that started 10 years ago and still haven't finished a game, and it's kind of saddening because they could have had a multitude of finished projects to show for it and they would have learned a lot more from it, I think, as well. So start small and just make something, finish something. I think that's the biggest piece of advice that you'll find. Yeah,
a good advice indeed. Well, I'd like to say thank you, BizMaster Studio, for your time of today, being part of the podcast and having fun chatting with you. It's actually very nice to hear your story, and also interacting of looking at two different genres of our own, and it's actually quite nice.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I've had a ball.
Well, hopefully I'll see you on your next stream working on your project. And for people who are interested of looking at BizMaster Studio and also on his Twitch as well, I'll be sure to put a link in the description of the podcast so you can go find him and have a look at what he does on Twitch. Probably have a talk with him and see what you can actually learn from him, or what you can actually or what kind of game you're actually going to be looking at that he's going to be doing.
Too lovely, yeah. Learn how not to do things a lot of the time.
Yeah. And I'll actually live out on the advice. Just be sure you have something to start. Like as BizMaster said, start off small, but also take your time and take your time. Just make sure you have yourself a certain deadline to actually push forward, and don't just rely on motivation. Like, motivation will get your foot through the door, but you need to be self-disciplined and self-taught to actually get yourself further and further in the process. And once you actually realize you got there in the end, it will be well worth it, and you can actually feel the relief of satisfaction once you actually finish making this game. So have a deadline, start it off from there, keep working, have a minimal viable project, and you're all good.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know a developer that regrets finishing their worst game and first game. That's it.
Well, until next time, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to say thank you for sticking around for the Game Dev Couch. I'll be doing these podcasts once every fortnight, so we can have more game developers to come in to share the story, have a little bit of chat, understand where they came from, where they started, and also yet what they think of the game as of today. But until then, ladies and gentlemen, this is Mitch, also known as Planetary, signing off, and thank you, BizMaster. Thank you very much for being here.
No worries, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Until next time, hopefully you have a wonderful week, and also yet a wonderful year as well, and be sure you keep on doing your game dev work, and stay awesome. Ta-ra!